Welcome to the National Women's Fitness Academy podcast. We're here to talk about women's health, female hormones, body image, and all things health and fitness.
Hello, girls, and welcome back to another episode of the Women's Fitness Academy's podcast. I'm your host, Siggy, one of the WFA's educators and a women's body image and fitness coach. Today, I'm chatting with the lovely Jess. And for those who are not aware of who Jess is, she's known as the Love Coach on Instagram, who is on a mission to helping people overcome fear, guilt, shame with self-love, self-awareness, and self-acceptance. And I feel there's been this theme going around lately that a lot of us are rediscovering ourselves through past relationships or past childhood traumas, or, just going through this amazing journey to just being a little bit more self-aware of ourselves. So what a better way to have this conversation with you, Jess, today. And I would love to start by asking you, what got you into this journey?
Yeah, so I became, Jess the Love Coach, a love embodiment coach, honestly, just through my own life experience. So, I was raised in a religious household. I struggled with really deep toxic shame and intense guilt, and this fear of being seen, and, really was a hardcore people pleaser, and, was afraid to, speak my truth, because I was so ashamed of who I was, and it was really this intense feeling of guilt and shame for simply existing. And so because of that, because of a huge lack of self-worth and a really low sense of self-worth, I found myself in and out of a lot of really toxic relationships when I was younger. I spent 7 years in a very abusive relationship with a narcissist, actually. And it was going through that really intense relationship that kind of brought me to rock bottom, which was really a blessing in disguise, because it was hitting rock bottom that really brought me to that place of like, I need to do something to change my life. I want to be happy. I want to feel good, in my life. And so when I ended that relationship, I was 26 years old at the time, and I embarked on a really dedicated self-discovery and self-love journey. I knew that, in order to create the life that I dreamed of living, I needed to find out who I was, what was my purpose in life? What did I like? Who was Jessica? So, I really just embarked on that journey. And throughout that journey, I came to the realization that, my whole life, I've always loved people, and I've always felt like I'm here to be of service to humanity, to people. And so throughout my self-discovery journey, I really realized that all of the struggles and the challenges that I had been through were there for a reason, and that it was really like my path in order to find my purpose, and realizing that I needed to go through everything I went through in order to be able to support and guide others who are going through those same exact things. And, the truth is, like, my experience isn't unique. It's very common. There's so many people out there, maybe even some of the listeners here, who are really struggling with feeling ashamed of themselves, feeling guilty for being who they are, and struggling being in and out of toxic relationships. So, I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to be able to share my story and be able to inspire others, and really share with people, that it's possible to have a better life, a better future, no matter where you are in your journey, no matter how much pain you're in, like, there is a way out. And in my opinion, why I am the love coach is because I believe the way out is through love.
Yes, I truly believe that. I love that you also mentioned that it all literally comes down to love. And again, like, love comes in different shapes and forms, but it also starts from within us. And I can so relate to how you came out of a relationship with a narcissist, because this is like bringing up a lot of memories to me, that I was in a relationship where it did not serve me whatsoever. But like you said, everything serves a purpose, and it's always teaching us a lesson. However, at that time, and I don't know if you can relate to this as well, but at that time when I was in that toxic relationship, I didn't love myself. There was no care in the world for myself. So I was putting all my eggs into their basket, not realizing what a people pleaser I was and neglecting my needs, where, you know, at the end of that relationship, I realized, oh wow, like I was literally doing wrong by myself. And as you mentioned, it comes back to us loving ourselves before we can love other people.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And that's, I mean, I actually, I have a piece of content on that, like why I spent years in a toxic relationship. And, I take full personal responsibility for it.
Mm.
Because of my lack of self-love and, because of my low sense of self-worth, I tolerated a lot of mistreatment because truthfully, I didn't believe that I deserved any better. And really for me, I think the importance of self-love is when we really love ourselves, when we hold ourselves, in high, with high standards, like we don't tolerate, mistreatment. And, I think there's an interesting thing here. A lot of people say, if you love yourself, you're never going to attract, bad quote unquote bad people and stuff like that. But I kind of like to change that a little bit. It's not that you'll stop attracting, unfortunate people. You can't avoid, less favorable people in life. There's plenty of people out there that are less favorable. But when you have that self-love, you're not going to tolerate that. You're not going to let that be a part of your life. And that's really where that self-love comes in, is just when you realize your worth and your value and you love who you are, you're only going to allow people to come into your life and be a part of your life who are going to reflect that back to you, by one having that within themselves so that you're able to share that with each other.
I love that so much. And I want us to go back to what you mentioned literally just 2 seconds ago about having higher standards when we have a higher self-worth. And you also mentioned that in your previous relationship, you didn't have much self-worth. Like, what did that look like back then in that relationship?
Yeah, so my partner was very mentally and emotionally abusive, and he, was constantly putting me down, name calling me and telling me, how horrible of a person that I was. And because I didn't have a very high view of myself, I didn't have any like rebuttals, like I didn't have a backbone. I didn't have like enough internal strength to say these things that you're saying about me aren't true, and I of course there were moments where I was like, well, I know I'm not a bad person, like it wasn't like I just was, fully like, oh, I'm such a horrible person. But honestly, after years of being told that you're a horrible person and not really having, I moved around a lot at that time. I've always been someone who moves a lot. So there were many times in my life where I was really isolated from other people. And so after years of hearing, that you're such a bad person and being called a lot of names, I actually did start to believe it. I questioned myself all the time of like, maybe I'm not a very good person, and feeling like, I guess I'm not deserving of, love and stuff like that. Like, not to mention, I mean, I loved my ex, I really did. And I struggled, especially as a people pleaser. I didn't really know how to like detach from that, if that makes sense. Like it was really like I was just constantly giving and constantly thinking that I need to fix myself to
Mm.
be like, if he was saying like you're this and you're that, I was always like, wow, there's something wrong with me. Like I need to like do better to make this relationship better, or like I need to work harder at being better so that he's not putting me down, that kind of thing. And so, like, for me, the self-worth issue really boiled down to just not being able to speak up for myself, like never advocating for myself, or feeling like I had anything positive to say about myself, and I think that was really the biggest thing for me was just constantly sacrificing my truth. But at the time, to be honest, I didn't know what my truth was. Like
Mm.
I knew that the things that were being said to me and I knew the way I was being treated didn't make me feel good. I mean, anyone can recognize like this doesn't make me feel good, but I didn't know what to do. I just kind of felt like, on a very subconscious level as well, I should say, like a lot of the things when it comes to having a low sense of self-worth, I think anyone who struggles with self-worth can probably relate to this. You don't sit there and think in your head like, oh, I have a really low sense of self-worth. It's a very like deep and unconscious pattern, where you make these choices and you have these certain behaviors like people pleasing, for example, where, you think consciously that you're just being a really nice person, that you're doing nice things like, it's not like this conscious thought of like, I'm purposely sacrificing my truth, or like I'm purposely giving up on my boundaries and stuff like that. It's a very deep unconscious pattern of like allowing, yourself to just never stand up for yourself, and not like prioritize what are my needs, what is going to make me feel really good. Instead, you're always thinking like, how can I make this other person feel good?
And to be honest, it literally comes down to, I don't want to obviously, put it down to like one particular need, like topic or person, but it literally comes down from like a childhood as well. Because if our needs weren't met back then, and we think, oh, we have to people please everyone and take care of everything and everyone, then it's just like no wonder why we had so much shame and guilt around by having a higher standard, because we were questioned it. The previous partner will be like, oh, like don't be ridiculous, or you sound stupid about stating whatever it is at the time. So again, it makes so much sense why you felt ashamed about yourself, or you knew the relationship you were in wasn't serving you a purpose, but you just didn't know how to navigate it or how to get out of that toxic way.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is, I didn't have any examples of that, like my upbringing, for example. I mean, I have two very loving parents who have an amazing relationship, actually. However, my parents are very religious. And so even though they're absolutely lovely people, I was raised in a very loving and affectionate home. Because of the religious aspect, unfortunately for me as an individual, it was very detrimental to me, as a young child, being told that I had to, be a Christian or I was going to burn in hell for eternity, and as a young kid, I was like, I think for me, like when I really think back to like where the guilt and the shame really started for me, it was at a really young age, and feeling like, why doesn't God talk to me? Like I'd be, I had to go to church, and like everyone at the church is talking about how they're, talking to God, and they have this relationship with God and stuff like that. And I was always like, well, I don't hear God, God doesn't talk to me. Like there must be something wrong with me, because I'm not having that same experience that these people are talking about, and then also being raised in a religious household, like it's kind of funny in a way. Like I find it quite comical anyways, that like religion, they're like, is all about like honesty, and it's supposed to be like all these really good people, and my parents are great people, they are, but like, I couldn't actually be very honest, growing up, like, because my truth, like my honesty was wrong in the eyes of Christianity. And so for me, that's where that all like started, was that I couldn't be honest, like I couldn't really share what was happening and stuff like that within me, or what I was going through. I couldn't really, express like my thoughts and my emotions, because they weren't considered good,
Yeah.
in the eyes of religion. And then especially when being young and having that whole like talking to God thing, like it's like that's where I really started to feel like inherently inadequate, and just feel like I must just be, wrong or bad. Like, these really simple words, like as children, we don't have this huge vocabulary, but that was what I felt at a really young age, is there must be something wrong with me because God isn't talking to me. And that's really where that deep toxic shame and guilt came from. And then it turned into the people pleasing, and, my parents, for example, they are quite people pleasers themselves as well, actually, like being in the church and stuff, they're very like selfless and always of service, and always like very generous. And, there's lots of great qualities that come along with that. Like I think generosity is a wonderful quality. But if you're being so generous that it's at the detriment of your own self, that's people pleasing, And so that was really the environment that I was raised in, was like, one, that anything to do with taking care of yourself is selfish. Like you need to be like a servant to God, like in this way of just like you need to be selfless, like you need to always be doing things for other people who are less fortunate than you, and anything that you do for yourself is just wrong and selfish.
Yeah, wow. It's so refreshing for you to speak about this because I didn't necessarily grow up in a really religious household, but I can so relate to the fact that my parents till today do have certain practices and beliefs that just don't align with me anymore. And by you saying how your parents were people pleasers and they were so like more obeying towards Christianity. I see those aspects within my parents as well, how they have these organized beliefs and practices that they do clearly every day, which obviously they tried to push onto me. But over the years, like yourself, I didn't hear God. It just didn't relate to me. It just didn't feel right whatsoever within myself. And I think that's most likely why when I went down that spiritual side of things to find my own individual practice. And I think that's the beauty about us doing the work, whatever that looks like for the individual, but having more of a sense of purpose around what we believe in instead of other people pushing their beliefs onto us.
Yes, I love that. And it brings up a really good point. I think that's really great to say. It doesn't matter, if your parents are religious or not. If like most people, like, I mean, this is just life, normal life as parents, like parents want to, raise their kids with their values and their beliefs. So it doesn't matter if it is religion or not. This can happen to anybody, where when we're born, like we're all individuals, and we all do have our own individual path. And maybe some of us don't necessarily find the courage to take our own path, but that's, I think, really where a lot of that guilt and shame come into play, is that it doesn't matter, what the actual background is. It just matters that if you had parents that are very opinionated in one way or another, and they really wanted to push their beliefs and their values on you, and you weren't able to freely express, yourself as a kid, that's where that guilt and shame can happen. And, I notice, like, I have a lot of clients and just like a lot of people, sending me DMs and stuff that say like, oh, I had a really lovely childhood. Like, where would this guilt and shame come from? And it's like, you can actually have a really lovely childhood and still develop this guilt and shame, because it could just be really simple moments in your childhood where your needs weren't met, where your expression was shut down. Like, like my parents are so loving, and super affectionate. And unfortunately, no one is perfect. And I don't expect that of anybody, but unfortunately there were certain needs and there were certain expressions that I needed to have that weren't able to be expressed, and I think that is something that truly everyone can relate to, of having, at some point, beliefs or thoughts or needs that just weren't met, and that's just part of life. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing bad with that. And that's where the beauty of self-work, self-love, and inner work really come from, is, it doesn't matter what we've been through in our past. As adults, we have this amazing and beautiful opportunity to, come home to ourselves and determine what are our values, what are our beliefs, what is our truth, and that truth is deep within us. It's in there within all of us, we just have to remember what it is.
Yeah. Say, Rebecca comes down knocking on your door and she doesn't feel that she's good enough, and she's feeling this shame within herself, whether it's from like a previous relationship or her childhood or whatever it is that comes, and she's really wanting to do that work, but is just not sure about what she values and what her purpose is. How would you be able to guide someone in the way to find their purpose around that, or to find, self-acceptance?
Yeah. So honestly, I have, like, for me, one of the simplest yet most powerful tools is journaling. And I always sound like a broken record, in my emails, my content, like on every podcast I've ever been on. It's just a broken record around journaling, but it's such a simple and so powerful practice to really dive deep into yourself, to access that unconscious part of your mind, to access the deepest parts of your heart. And, it's really just sitting down with a pen and a paper, and you can start out by just writing down what are your thoughts, what are you thinking about right now, just start to get that out, and then you can really start to dive deep by asking very specific questions, like what makes me feel good, and really dropping into the body. Dropping into the body. One of my favorite practices that I do with my clients is I just have them put their hands on their heart, and close their eyes. And I have them bring all their attention to their heart, and actually ask your heart, like, what lights you up? What's going to make you, my heart, feel good? And the heart answers. Like, it's quite amazing, and it's something that you want to practice quite often, because the more that you practice it, the more open that channel becomes. And, the more that you can just drop into the body, because the mind can be such a loud and chaotic place, but there's stillness in the heart, always. The heart is always still. And it's really just about building that connection to the heart, and always asking the heart, what do you need? And that's, for me, really how I determined, what are my values, and asking, like, what lights up my heart, what makes me feel good, what makes me feel safe in my body, what makes me feel drained, like just asking yourself all of these questions. And I have a step-by-step self-love. It's a free step-by-step self-love guide where, there's some questions in there people can ask, and but it's really, to me, it's just about that journaling, and really getting in touch with your heart. And sometimes I think the mind can, like I said, be a really chaotic place. And so for me, one of my favorite practices when it comes to, like, being able to kind of put the mind to rest a little bit so that you can hear the heart is, if there's thoughts going on, especially if there's negative thoughts going on, using a really neutral anchor point is what I call it. So if the thoughts are coming up, and you can't really, like, you're like, I don't know what my heart is saying. Like, just kind of like when I was a kid, I'm like, oh, God isn't talking to me, like maybe you feel like, oh, I'm not connected to my heart. If the thoughts are coming up, just stop, and just say a word. Like, for me, it's just like, stop, peace, and just settling the mind like that. And the more you practice that, the more the thoughts just start to, will slowly fade away. But yeah, to me, I would say my first step towards everyone is the journaling, and, placing your hand on your heart and putting all of your attention there, and just asking the heart, what does it need?
I find journaling has been so helpful in my journey as well. I think I've been journaling since I was, oh my God, like an early teenager. But, back then it's like, dear diary, today I went on a bike ride or whatever. But like now, obviously, when you're journaling, you really can, put everything down on paper. Like, it's your safe space. I tell you what, if someone ever read my journal, I reckon it would be like a personal biography about my life, even though I never write my name in there. But it's so lovely to hear that you're a very big advocate of this, because I know a lot of people don't feel so strong about journaling. And I think that might be also like a very fixed mindset, going, oh, like, I don't need to write my shit on paper. It's just like, well, if you're not willing to talk to a coach or seek a professional, it's, either the journaling or meditation. But then again, coming to meditation, a lot of people have that resistance of sitting still within themselves. And like you said, you're very big about just calming the mind, anchoring into the heart. But most people don't know what that feels like. And I think that's why there's so much resistance. And I can speak from experience. When I first started meditating 7 years ago, I remember I was meditating and I started a guided meditation, and I was just like, oh, this is rubbish. Like, what's happening? Like, why am I doing this? When now I literally can just meditate silently and just do like breath work meditation. And I'm sure you can relate to this as well, Jess, is that these ideas will come up, or these feelings that you'll be able to start embracing and accepting a little bit more.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the thing with like journaling and meditation these are practices. Like they're going to take, there's going to be some like hardship in the beginning, even with journaling. I think like with journaling and meditation, it's just as you said, a lot of people have these preconceived notions about what these practices look like. And that's why, like, I do promote meditation with my clients, specifically metta meditation, because that's, my favorite type of meditation. It's what's made the most impact for me. But when it comes to journaling, like the thing that I love about journaling is that it doesn't have to look any certain way. Yeah. Like it's just you, a piece of paper and a pen, or even on your laptop, it doesn't even have to be writing down, but like, it doesn't have to look any certain way. And, just like you said, like the thing is like your journal, like it is the safest space possible. There's no response, like it's not, you don't have to feel stupid. You don't have to like be ashamed or feel guilty. Like it's just the thoughts going out of your mind, and it's so helpful to get the thoughts out of your mind. I don't know about everyone else, but like I used to struggle with so many negative thoughts. I had just this horrible inner mean voice that popped up all the time. And the way that I personally learned to overcome that was through journaling, and just writing stuff down helped me to get out of those repetitive loops that I was so stuck on. And I just love journaling because, like you said, like I too, like I've been, pretty much journaling since like middle school, probably since I was like 9 or 10 years old, but it was literally like a Dear Diary, and sometimes I still write like that, I journal every single day. And sometimes I just write about what I did the previous day. Sometimes I like, when I sit down with my journaling, I say like, oh, what's coming up for me today? Like, what am I feeling? And I start to investigate. I'm like, oh, is there any tension in the body? Like, what was there anything that came up yesterday that felt like challenging, or anything that was really positive? Like, I kind of just start asking myself these questions. And sometimes I'm like, to be honest, I don't really have like all that much like deep stuff to go on today. I'm just going to write about what I did through my day yesterday. And for me now, I'm so many years into the practice that usually I'll start writing, like, even if it's just about my day. And then I'll notice as I'm writing about the day that I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. Okay, this happened. And now I remember that I actually had like a bit of like an emotional arousal in this moment, that I didn't feel very safe in my body. Or, oh yeah, this experience came up that kind of reminded me of this past experience, and it's just like, you can start to connect the dots and start to uncover some things, and that's what I love about the journaling is like, once you start to write, even if like, I have a client who just hates writing. Like he's just like, I'm not a writer. And I'm like, I just want, just try it, just try a little bit. Like even starting with something really simple, like gratitude journaling, like every day, just simply write down 5 things you're grateful for. You can even write it in the notes in your phone, but it's just about starting that practice. And the key is to start small. That's what I tell all my clients. It's just starting small, one tiny little thing each day that you can introduce, and start building that as a habit. Because like I said, it's like, it's a practice, journaling is a practice. And so you just have to start small.
It's so true, because again, like if you don't give it a go, then like how are you going to know if you're going to like it or not? And I truly believe as coaches, we have so much compassion for people who come from these type of places, because like we've been there, we know how it feels. And I think it's such a beautiful thing to reflect upon, because sometimes I'll come across certain people or certain clients of mine, and I'll be like, wow, like there's so much resistance here. Like, why is this happening? And then it will take me back to, my previous relationships or incidents or whatever that I was occurring at the time. And I would reflect back and like, wow, I wish I had me right now helping me to navigate all of that. So it's really beautiful. And especially like you mentioned, it's those tiny little wins or those tiny little steps that will eventually help you to just steer away from that negativity. Not that saying negativity is going to go completely away and you're going to live this happy, wonderful life. Like we know healing is not a beautiful place at times. It can be very dark, scary, and very lonely. And I'm laughing because like I'm going through this journey right now myself in terms of healing from a relationship. And we know the struggles that comes from getting over previous partners and having these cycles that we're wanting to break. But like you also mentioned before, when we leave certain relationships, it teaches us a lesson of what not to do again next time, or how to do it a little bit different.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'm a really firm believer and a huge advocate for that every relationship that we have in our life, relationships are reflections. I say this a lot as well. And it's like when it comes to this, like, for example, when it comes to the self-love and self-discovery journey, it's an internal journey. It's an inward journey in here, inside yourself, with your own heart and everything like that. But you can only go so far with just yourself. We need relationships, which all that relationships are is we have a relationship with anything that we interact with. It's not just a friend, it's not just a romantic partner, family, like even objects and stuff. We have relationships with them, anything we're interacting with. So the thing is, we need these external things and external people to be able to show us ourselves on an even deeper level than we can go on our own. And I feel like it's really like, we need to learn, it's, to me, it's a gift, like relationships, even really painful relationships. My relationship was, it was horrible, but I'm so grateful for it now. It taught me so much, and it really showed me, the shadow sides of myself. It showed me the parts of myself that I was really ashamed of, that I really didn't like, and even like the negative things that my ex would say about me. Not all of it was true, for sure. It was not nice, but there were some bits of truth to some of the things that he said. And it's really painful and hard to admit that, especially when you're in the moment. You're like, no, that's really hurtful. But then after the fact, at least for me in my own case, like I looked back and I said, okay, like obviously he was saying a lot of these things from his own place of pain, but it gave me a chance to look and say, like, well, what are the parts of myself, that I don't want to admit to, or what are the parts of myself that I'm like hiding from or ignoring or suppressing, and that's what I think, like, relationships are so beautiful in that way, that they can really teach us so much about ourselves, and so much about life and so much about love. And it can help us to gain more empathy. It can help us to gain more understanding for each other. And, it's just like, to me, if you can leave a relationship and, of course there can be heartache and there'll be moments of grief and things like that, where you're grieving the loss of something that was a part of your life and a part of you. But then you need to look at it with like this curiosity and some gratitude, and think of, like, what did I learn from that experience? What a gift that experience was, even if it was really painful, because now I know more. I can, I understand more. Like I've grown from that experience, and what an amazing thing, to just have that opportunity to be constantly learning and growing from the experiences that we have in our lives.
I literally love everything about that, because too often we will not want to dive into those parts of ourselves after relationships or any other negative interactions that we have with people, because again, it's like your ego is taking a hit. It's going, oh, nothing's wrong with me, I'm fine. They were the negative ones. They're the ones who, mistreated me. But like you mentioned, everything is a reflection of us, whether we want to see it or not. And again, like sometimes some situations can be quite harder than usual. Again, like maybe the person was a narcissist and they were really mean, and maybe you lowered your standards and they took advantage of you. But like you said, that's a gift for you to realize, okay, well, why did I lower my standards? Why couldn't I step up and set healthier boundaries? Why couldn't I speak up for myself? So again, it takes you back to, those shadow parts of you going, okay, well, I felt ashamed. I felt insecure. I didn't think I was good enough. So hence why I couldn't, set those boundaries. And I was just literally wanting to like people please them. So it's a really good way of looking at previous relationships, pardon me. And also I wanted to ask you, like, what are some ways that have helped you navigate those struggles moving away from exes, like moving from previous relationships?
Honestly, it's really that, like, the gratitude part. And I know it might just sound a little strange, but for me, like, at the end of every relationship, I just think, like, what did I learn from that? And I've kind of always looked at it that way, actually. Like, I've just always, like, even though almost every one of my past relationships besides my now husband and the one relationship I had right before my current partner, the rest were not healthy in any way, shape, or form. But, like, looking back, I can see how I learned something in every single one of them, and I also, like, sorry to go off of this really quick, but I just wanted to say one thing that was really coming up for me before. When I talk about the fact that relationships are reflections and stuff like that, if you're in an abusive relationship, I'm not saying whatsoever that you deserve that abuse or that you deserve that mistreatment or that you called that abuse into your life or anything like that. But, well, not and one thing that I always think about is that there are people out there in the world who have suffered the most inhumane, like, and most, like, just the worst things out there, like whatever we can imagine as being, like, the worst thing that could ever possibly happen to a human. There are people out there who have experienced that, and those people have overcome that. There's so many people out there who have had absolutely horrific pasts, and they're still, living today. They are feeling joy today. They're out there sharing their story and spreading their message and showing every single person that no matter how horrific of a past you have, you can still overcome it with love. And so that's personally why I've, like, taken on that belief that even if the worst things that happen to us are beautiful gifts and lessons. Because to me, also coming from a bit of, like, a spiritual background, believing that the universe, like, we all have our path that we're on, and we're all on this path towards, enlightenment, however many lifetimes that takes. And the universe is going to continually put us in situations that give us the opportunity to grow on that path. And so, that's just, like, my personal belief. That's what brings me a lot of peace in my life, is realizing that no matter what I go through, it's a beautiful gift for me to be able to learn and continue growing down my path, down this path of life. And so, yeah, sorry, that was a bit of a tangent, but I did want to speak on that whenever I say relationships are reflections and things, and I'm talking about the shadow side and stuff, like, if you are in a very abusive relationship, if you're in a really horrific situation, I'm not at all saying that you've attracted that into your life. Yeah. However, I do still always invite people to try to see the silver lining in it, and just based on what I've seen, in my life, I know that there is always a silver lining. And it's an interesting idea, but it's really helped me in my life, having the kind of, like, a non-attachment way of looking at things, like, especially when it comes to relationships, having this idea of non-attachment and saying, like, that was an experience that I got to have. I no longer have that experience, but now I'm open to have a new experience, that's going to teach me another lesson. That's going to, show me more of myself. Show me more parts of myself that I can love, that I can accept, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it totally does. And again, it's coming out of those relationships to have a bigger and better perspective of what we're wanting to accept next time and what we're not wanting to accept it. And what brought to my mind is I was watching over one of your stories earlier, and you were talking about how the anxious type usually attracts more of the avoidant type, and how they kind of, like, no, I wouldn't say gel together, but, like, in a way they kind of, like, work together in a relationship, because one is literally thinking they're not good enough and they're wanting that constant validation. But then the avoidant is more like that, the emotional unavailable, just avoiding every situation. So I would love your input around this, and to explain to our listeners a little bit more about, like, why this happens.
Yeah, so it's definitely like the anxious and avoidant dance, It's a very push and pull relationship. And so I think for me it's both people, whether they're avoidant or whether they're anxious, this is an insecure attachment style. And so when you have an insecure attachment style, your nervous system is used to being in a state of fear, ultimately, fear and worry. When it comes to the anxious, actually, when it comes to both, because it's an insecure attachment style, both people really don't feel like they're good enough. They're just expressing this in a different way. But because it's this like fear and this insecurity, you're used to being in this state of stress and fear. And so the reason why these two people tend to feel attracted to each other all of the time is just because the chaos of the relationship, even though in the mind it feels like this, is really hard, this doesn't feel good, even though consciously you're kind of like, what's going on? But unconsciously, you're just receiving that familiarity that you're used to in your nervous system, in your body. Like you're used to being in this state of stress and fear. And so you're getting into a relationship with somebody who's just going to continue to feed that insecurity and feed that fear, because that's what's normal. That's what feels safe and comfortable in your body, even though it's not safe and comfortable in your body. But if that's what you're used to experiencing, if say you are anxious or say you are avoidant and meet somebody who's secure, it's going to feel really strange. Like there might not be attraction there even, because you're like, this person, isn't making me feel all these like emotions and stuff that I'm so used to feeling. And that feels really bizarre. So when it comes to this like anxious and avoidant dynamic, like, I always say on my page, like if you have an insecure attachment style, which is like mostly, everyone, you really need to start becoming aware of your default behaviors, and the first thing is, taking your attachment style quiz. That's the first step, figure out what is your attachment style, and then really investigate with a journal, what was my childhood like? What were my parents like? Like, where could this have developed? And like I said, I do have some people that write to me and they're like, oh, I did the journaling exercise, but like, I had a really good childhood. I just don't understand. Like, how did I develop this anxious attachment? And, like I said, it can be really simple things, like anxious attachment, for example, is really like, and there's so many ways that, all these attachment styles can develop. But when it comes to the anxious attachment, it's really about like inconsistent parenting, so maybe your parents worked a lot, which, that's a very common thing. A lot of people had parents that had to work a lot and, they had to go to daycare and things like that. So maybe they only got to spend a very short amount of like actually quality time with their parents. And the rest of the time, they were at daycare, or their parents were, having to drop them off, pick them up. There was like a lot of energetic chaos happening. It seems like a very normal thing. You wouldn't look at that and say like, oh, my parents, it's not that your parents were bad parents or anything like that. But simple things like that can cause the anxious attachment style, because as kids, we're not able to, understand, oh, our parents have to go to work. It's not that they don't love us. It's not that they don't want to spend time with us or fulfill our needs. They have to go to work so they can provide for their family. And so when it comes to, either anxious or avoidant, fearful, whatever your attachment style is, you want to become aware of what are your default behaviors. And then you want to investigate, okay, where did this develop? And then when you start to become aware of your default behaviors, like, for example, I used to be heavily avoidant. My default behaviors were all the signs of an avoidant. I was intensely independent. I moved out of my parents' house at 17. I moved as far away from my parents as I could at that time of being 17, 8 hours away, to a big city. And it was just like, I couldn't wait to grow up. I couldn't wait to get old enough to just get out of the house and stop listening to their rules. I was like that in every relationship that I was in. I never really allowed myself to become like emotionally attached. Like, I liked my partners, I fell in love with people, but I would always be the one to break up and get my one foot out the door. Like, I was always one foot out the door to like protect not only myself, but I had this idea that I had to protect them. Like, oh, I'm going to hurt them. Like, I'm going to, break their heart. Like, I better just, end it now. Or like, I better not get too attached because like, I know I'm going to leave, And so then like when it came to conflict and stuff like that, I hated conflict. I avoided it at all costs. So one, I would never speak up, the people pleasing and things like that. I'd never speak up. And then two, if there was conflict started, I would just like walk away, I'd just be like, oh, I can't take this. It's too much, and then I would leave. And so you want to become aware of what are your default behaviors, whether that is the anxiousness, whether that's avoiding, like whatever it is. And awareness is the first step, because how can you change something if you're not aware of it? And then it's really working towards security. Like, this is one of the biggest things that I always say, like, no matter what your current attachment style is, no matter what attachment style developed in your childhood, you don't have to remain that way.
Yeah.
Like, I think like a lot of people are like, oh, well, how do I like manage my anxious attachment? And it's like, well, you don't manage it. You work on becoming secure, like you don't want to just stay, just because you were, raised with an anxious attachment style doesn't mean you have to be an anxious person for the rest of your life. And so, it's really about like becoming secure through that awareness, and realizing like, okay, when I get triggered by conflict, or, if I'm feeling like as an anxious person, like, okay, my partner, isn't being very communicative, and now like I'm getting really anxious, like, well, how can I work on that? One, you can work on communicating, with a journal. Write down, what are you feeling? What was the situation? Like, what were the details of the situation? How did you, how are you feeling about that? And then what do you want to say to your partner? What can you communicate to your partner to allow your partner to be able to better support you? And that goes for both parties. I'm a huge advocate for regular check-ins with your journals, journal about how are you feeling, what situations have come up, and how did it make you feel? And then you come together with your partner and you have a check-in, and you just read, because so many people struggle with communicating.
Yeah.
That's where a lot of conflict comes from, is a lack of communication. So that's where the journals come in. You have your safe space. You have your safe space where you can actually open up and be really vulnerable. And then you come together in a dedicated safe space. This is a dedicated safe container. We're going to come and share, we're going to connect and share with what's on our hearts. And we're just going to actively listen, and just actively listen in this container, so that each person has the opportunity to truly communicate what's going on with them. And, if you're in a relationship, that anxious avoidant relationship, it's going to be really challenging. It's not that those relationships can't work, but both people need to become secure in order for that relationship to last and actually be fulfilling. I have so many people who write me DMs all the time where they're like, I've been in an anxious avoidant marriage for like 25 years and it's been hell. I've never heard anyone say I've been in an anxious avoidant relationship and it's just been so beautiful. I've never heard
that. Non-existent.
It can be long lasting, but is it going to be really healthy and really happy? I don't know, unless both people are really doing the work and working towards becoming secure. But, yeah, hopefully that answered it.
It definitely does. And, reflecting on this, I can definitely notice that some parts of me in the past were quite anxious when it led to having partners, and they were quite avoidant. And the one thing that I guess we both struggled with was communicating. And I love the fact that you're very big on check-ins. With my previous relationship, we did do it, but I think there wasn't a common area where we both wanted the same things. And like you said, like values is a really big one. So if both parties don't sit on the same spectrum in terms of values and what the purpose and what the vision is of that relationship, then again, that's something that needs to be communicated about as well, because that comes down to people pleasers. If you're wanting to just constantly people please your partner and just push your values to the side and push your vision to the side, that's not going to be healthy because, you know, it might be 20 years in and you're still anxious and they're avoidant and you're living in hell, or you think it's healthy, but is it actually? So I think it's a very beautiful way to bring a little bit more conscious work into dating or even relationships. Speaking of dating, like, you know, this new era of dating, well, it's actually not new. It's been here for quite a while with the whole dating apps. And this is something that is, you know, it's been challenging for a lot of women, you know, in this space of dating, because we don't go out and meet people as we used to 10, 20 years ago. It's literally you're on your phone all the time, and it's just like, how can you build these communicative, you know, dating or relationships with that? Like, do you come across any of this?
Yeah, so it's quite funny. So I met my husband on Tinder.
Yeah.
I had never met anyone on a dating app. I was using it to practice Spanish when I was living in the Costa Rica. But yeah, so I met my husband on Tinder, and so my experience, at least with that, was, you know, kind of short. Like, we talked online for like 2 weeks, and then, you know, he's like, come and quarantine with me, and you know that, like, story on Instagram or wherever. I've shared it a million times, but my partner and I are in a non-monogamous relationship. So both of us are still on dating apps. And so this is how I handle dating apps. First of all, I don't care what anyone else says. I don't care if people say that it is, you know, not cool, not attractive, not sexy to be open and honest, to ask hard questions. I don't give a shit, you know, like, I'm like, I want to know, like, is this person worth my time to meet? You know, and like, everyone, you know, uses dating apps for different things. I mean, I personally, like, I just like connecting with people on a really deep level, like emotionally, intellectually. Like, I love deep conversations. Like, I love that. So for me personally, what I do, and this is what I, you know, suggest to all my friends and stuff like that. I'm like, you want to have as much detail in your profile as you possibly can. And if you're not getting swipes, don't get discouraged. Like, you should be glad for that, because
100%.
you're not having a bunch of people that are not aligned for you wasting your time.
Yeah, it's so true.
Like, and this is actually, to me, a really cool thing about dating apps. Like, that, this is why I prefer Hinge. I mean, I'm honestly banned from Tinder, so I don't use Tinder anymore, but I love Hinge because, like, you can actually write a lot of information on there, you know? And when I'm going through Hinge, if there's guys or women out there who only have like one word answers, I'm not going to swipe. But that's just because of what I value and what I'm looking for. You want to be super clear on what are you looking for, and don't waste your time with anyone that doesn't align with that. You know, like, we were saying, the values, like, you want to determine what are your core values. You know, what do you want in your life? What does your ideal lifestyle look like? Do you want kids? Do you want a family? Do you want to buy a house in a city? What does your job look like? Like, you want to go through all the practicalities of what your ideal life looks like. And then you want to put that out there. And if somebody doesn't align with that, don't waste your time. Like, you'll be so much better off if you're like, when you're looking on the dating apps, like, think about, like, what is it that I want to find in a partner? And then, you know, maybe you're somebody who, you know, builds attraction through physical attraction. You know, there's equal amount of people out there, and there's nothing wrong with building attraction through physical, like, through the physical. There's actually nothing wrong with that, according to human design, which is something I'm super passionate about. It's actually called outer vision, and it's like a normal thing. I don't have that. So I used to think people who were like that were just like shallow and superficial, but I've realized it's actually like a real thing, like a biological thing. Anyway, so maybe you are somebody who builds attraction off of looks at first, you know, but that's not what's going to create a healthy relationship. You need to have that compatibility and that alignment in your values. So you want to start, if you find somebody that you're interested in, you're like, oh, this person's very attractive, I'm interested in them, just start up a conversation with them. You know, like, I don't understand, like, the people who are just like, hey, let's meet up, you know, and then you go and meet up. Like, don't you want to establish some bit of like, you know, a baseline of like, am I even going to have a good conversation with this person? You know, like, does this person align with any of my interests or any of my values? And so, yeah, I think when it comes to the dating apps, like my biggest thing is just like put as much information on your profile as you can. Be very clear about what you're looking for. And then if people do match, like if you do match with somebody, then you know you have a much higher chance of actually having a connection with that person, you know, and maybe, who knows, maybe you'll find your life partner by doing that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I remember when I first started on Hinge, I literally had a bunch of photos, maybe like one or two, three sentences, and I was just getting like random people liking my photos, and I was just like, is this who I'm wanting to attract? Because like, yeah, it gives you a nice stroke to the ego. Yeah, people think I'm pretty, but again, I'm very similar to yourself. It's not just about the physical, it's about the intellectual. Like I love deep, meaningful conversations that keep us up all night, all day. So then I realized, okay, I wasn't serving myself better in these apps. So then I changed my profile and I literally wrote out what I value, what I'm looking for, what I'm not going to tolerate, and what I enjoy doing. And then slowly, as you mentioned, you will get certain people who kind of align with you, and you'll be able to build that base before you actually meet them. And I love the fact that you also mentioned that don't get so discouraged when people are not liking your stuff, because that means that they're not aligned with you. It doesn't mean that you're not likable. It just means the right person just hasn't come across your path yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Like my Hinge profile is so detailed, and like I love it because when, you know, obviously there are people who still just like my profile and stuff like that. But the only people that I interact with are, you know, like in my profile, it's, you know, there's like the poll, like give me your opinion on, you know, whatever. And so I have like inner peace, self work, self love, and self development, you know, and those are my favorite. Whenever people respond to that inner peace, self love, and self development, that instantly sparks a good conversation, you know, like usually they are aligned with somewhat with, you know, some of my values in some way. If you're passionate about any of those three things, then I know we have something really cool to talk about. And so that's how I use dating apps now anyway. So I would definitely say, yeah. And like the thing is like, yeah, about not getting discouraged, you know, it's like that in life in general, you know, not just on the dating apps. Like if you are somebody who just wants to be in a relationship so badly and you're just like, why can't I find someone, you know, why can't I get into a relationship? Like you have to, one, just don't be discouraged, but also like just stop putting so much focus on this need to be in a relationship. And chances are that is when you will find a really amazing relationship. Like when you realize, like, you know, I'm okay being with myself. I'm okay having a relationship with myself, you know, that is when you're actually going to attract somebody else who's also living their best life. And then and then once you get really clear on your values and what you want, you're like, okay, I'm living my best life. I just met someone else who's living their best life, and we're, you know, on that same level. That's when you can come together and actually have a really beautiful relationship where you're not trying to fix or complete, or, you know, you're not trying to fill a void. Like you're like, this person is enhancing the love that I already have within myself and for myself. And like, I mean, to me, that's the ultimate thing. Like when you can be happy being in a relationship with yourself, when you're like, I'm a good partner to me, you know, I'm a good partner to someone else, and I'm only going to allow someone to be with me who's going to be a good partner to me as well.
Yes. Oh my God. I love everything about that. Because again, like if you can't love yourself, if you can't respect yourself, if you can't value yourself, how are you going to bring all those attributes into an actual relationship with another individual? Wow. Yeah. To be honest, I'm speechless.
It's like I feel like, you know, sometimes when I say things like this, you know, I feel bad because I know that like it might hurt some people. Like so, you know, some people might feel like discouraged by that. And, you know, for me as well, like I don't think that you need to be like, you know, totally embodying self-love and stuff like this to get into a relationship, but there does need to be some foundation of that. You know, you need to be working at it.
Yeah.
Because like relationships can enhance that journey, But unless there's a foundation there of that already, it's going to be really hard to keep up with that. I had someone DM me the other day, like, I just started my healing journey, but I kind of like this person. Like, should I, get into a relationship with them? And I'm like, well, the thing is, if you just started your healing journey and you get into a relationship right now, you're going to be taking away all that focus and energy and time that you could be putting into yourself. You're going to be diverting that energy to someone else, And so I think it's really important to, kind of ask yourself, like, is it right for me to get into a relationship right now? Or could I possibly spend a little bit more time focusing on myself and taking care of myself? For me, I spent 18 months, a year and a half, after my toxic relationship. I spent a year and a half of being single. Like, I mean, yeah, sure, I still like kind of like had these really short flings and stuff like that. But like I was very dedicated to, like, I do not want to get into any committed long-term relationship. Like, I don't want to get into any relationship with anybody until I can be in a loving, committed relationship with myself, and until I feel like I am whole and complete just as I am, just by myself. I don't want to get into a relationship with anyone else, especially because of the fact I had such a strong tendency of losing myself in relationships because of the people pleasing. I was very codependent, always putting, the other person's happiness as my responsibility, like just always losing myself. So I was just like, I don't want to do that ever again.
Yeah.
So I'm going to make sure that I have a really solid and strong, like, foundation within my own self of myself, of that individuality, and saying, like, I know I'm going to advocate for myself now. Like, I'm not going to let anyone else or anything else like take that away from me. And, I mean, that's when I met my husband. I wasn't looking for a relationship or anything like that. I was so happily in love with myself, and then I just so happened to meet someone who was so happily in love with themselves, and all of our core values aligned, all of, like, every single box somehow ticked. But for me, it was really like the being in that place where I spent a year and a half dedicated to being single so that I could really work through a lot of things. Because as well, one of my biggest things was, like, whenever I do get into a relationship in the future, I don't want to, like, bring all my baggage with me. Like, I want to be able to have a really awesome, healthy relationship. And I want to come into that relationship within a healthy place, like in a healthy place within myself. So that was a huge part of, like, my journey was just knowing that I didn't want to bring all my past pain into a future relationship.
And it just shows that, you like, time heals, but if you're not putting in the time to heal, you're just going to constantly do that negative recycle. So yeah, I literally I admire that so much, because again, like, we come across so many individuals who come out of relationships and they neglect that time for themselves and the healing and the self-reflection, and they jump onto another relationship, whether it's a positive or negative. Like, for some individuals it has been a positive for them, but then for most people it has been a negative impact because they just keep repeating that old cycle. So I love the fact that you're inspiring a lot of women and people out there to make them realize that you do need that time for yourself to do a lot of more of self-reflection before you enter a new relationship.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. I know so many people. And I mean, when I was in high school, I was one of them, just hopping from relationship to relationship. But, for me on a personal level, I needed to be in a relationship to feel worthy, to feel loved. I needed, I heavily relied on external validation. So for me, after the fact, I looked back and I said, okay, yeah, I recognize that I was in relationship to relationship to relationship, because anytime I wasn't, I felt unlovable. I felt unworthy. I didn't feel good enough. And I needed to be in that container of a relationship in order to validate my worth, And so anyone out there who does hop from relationship to relationship, I just invite you to, investigate with a journal why is it that you feel like you need to be in a relationship all the time? And just asking yourself that, and, what does it feel like when you're out of a relationship? And sometimes it can be really hard to, a lot of people say, I don't want to be alone. But, I always encourage like to ask why that is. Like, why don't you want to be alone? Like we're humans, we're social beings, we need connection. But just spending a little bit of time alone is a very good thing, actually. Like there's nothing wrong with spending some time alone and being alone and not being in a relationship. But I think as well, like culturally and societally, we put so much focus on being in a relationship, in that you have to be in a relationship to be happy, to, be part of the status quo or whatever. But, I really encourage people, like, just, ask yourself and do a little investigation into like why you feel the need to always be in a relationship. And, sometimes, like, for a lot of people, like myself included, before, like when I was alone, I was forced to, kind of be with myself. And that was very uncomfortable because I didn't like myself, and so, but I think it's important, like, if you want to go on a healing journey, you have to push past that fear, and you have to learn to come up against that discomfort, and learn to embrace it, learn to allow it to be there, and realize, like, yes, this is going to be really painful and really uncomfortable. But you just have to think about what's on the other side of that fear, what's on the other side of that discomfort. And I can guarantee, I never guarantee anything, but I can guarantee that if you can learn to allow and embrace the discomfort, and you can really learn to like give love to that painful part, it's going to feel so much better on the other side. Like it absolutely will feel better on the other side. Like there's nothing better than love, and especially loving yourself, having that internal peace, like for me personally, that's my biggest thing. Like the reason why I love sharing this with people is because I think of my old self and I think of my present self, and how my old self was just always in like tumultuous pain, everything was painful, everything was hard, everything was like, why is this happening? And the present me, I'm just like, it doesn't matter. Like I still have bad days, obviously. Like, I'm a person. I still have emotions. I still have days that don't feel great. I get overwhelmed. I get burnt out. I have all these things still. But underneath all of these emotions that I'm feeling is just this ultimate bliss in my heart, just this never wavering peace within my heart of just like, wow, I'm so grateful for everything, like I have so much love, and that love can never be taken away. And that's what that's why I'm a coach, because that's what I ultimately want to share with people. Like I wish that my hope is, that everyone in the world can experience, even if it is just a glimpse of that bliss and that peace within their hearts. Like I'm so happy, I'm so overjoyed every time that, someone messages me, or, my clients have these amazing breakthroughs. I'm just like, that's why I do this work, like that's why I share my story so much, because, it's just like, I just want to show people that it is possible. And I know it's possible because we all actually do have that bliss within our hearts, and it's just about peeling away all the pieces of armor that we've put up around our own hearts as we've gone through life. Every heartache, every pain, everything, it just keeps placing these shells of armors around our hearts, but the joy and the peace, the love, that's all in there. We just have to peel back the layers, one by one.
Slowly but surely. And you know what, like that's the human experience. It's us navigating really hard times to find joy and love again. And it's a beautiful way to look at it. And you know what I tell my clients all the time, everything is temporary. Whether you're going through a really hard time right now, whether you're enjoying a beautiful moment with yourself or with others, like embrace that, because you're never going to experience that again. You might experience in a different manner, but like you said, like leading with love and noticing those different aspects of yourself. And I just wanted to finish on a note about spending time on our own. You know, you mentioned that so many people come to you saying that they don't want to feel alone or they feel lonely. And it's just like, yeah, that loneliness feeling, you know, kind of like ebbs and flows. But again, if we don't find that time to put back onto ourselves, it's just like, again, it goes back, like, how are you going to put that time into someone else? And I truly believe that you mentioned before about how on that healing journey, we really need to prioritize ourselves more before jumping onto another, whether it's a situationship or whether it's a relationship, like really putting that time and effort on what exactly you're wanting to, you know, attract that future partner that you eventually want to be with.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's just so important. You know, I can't stress enough the importance of, you know, prioritizing yourself. Like it brings about so much more fulfillment in your life when you are doing things that are aligned with you,
Yeah.
you know, and figuring out, what does that mean? You know, like what does that alignment mean? Well, you just have to start asking yourself, you know, what brings you joy? You know, what makes you feel good? You know, not just what makes you happy. You know, happiness is an impermanent emotion. It's just something that comes and goes no matter what. So I never say, you know, I don't ever say ask yourself what makes you happy, but like what brings you joy? You know, what brings you that deep feeling of satisfaction in your body? What brings you that feeling of comfort, you know, like what just makes you feel like, you know, I don't know, like sometimes I use like the example of like you know, like a jacuzzi or something like that, you know, or like a warm, like a hot bath, for example, where you just melt into the water and you're just like, oh, you can just like really relax your body and just let out that breath and just feel so relaxed. Like what in life makes you feel like that? You know, like what kind of energy makes you feel like that? Like think about people that you've been around that have given you that sense of relaxedness and peace. Like, you know, get clear about what is really valuable to you, you know, and then you can start to live in alignment with that, you know, and you can start to make choices and you like start to have behaviors that bring you to that place, you know. And I'm such a big dreamer, and I always encourage people, you know, like, what is your dream life? You know, and what are the qualities of that dream life? And that's the thing, when you are alone, when you have that time for self-reflection and that alone time, and you're in your own energetic space, you're not being influenced by others, you know, and that's something that is so important. When you're always in a relationship, it's hard to determine what are your own thoughts, what are your own beliefs, what are your own feelings. Like it can be very challenging, you know, to distinguish that. That's why that solitude and that alone time is so important, is to really get clear on your truth. And then you can, you know, go out into the world and find things that align with that truth, your truth.
I love that. Well, guys, I hope that today's episode was very enlightening for all of you. And maybe for those who haven't journaled before, maybe this is your opportunity right now to open a book or piece of paper, or even just, as Jess said, just writing on the computer, just the thoughts that are coming through to you, and start navigating the emotions of what's happening within yourself, what's happening within your relationships, and really connecting with yourself on a deeper level to find that self-love again, whether you lost it, whether you're wanting to gain more of it, and accepting yourself as a person, but also being willing to have those really hard conversations with yourself about what needs to be changed as well. So Jess, thank you so much for today. I know this conversation is going to change a lot of lives.
Thank you so much for having me on, Siggy. I really enjoyed this.
So good. Well, girls, if you enjoyed today's podcast, please make sure that you screenshot it, tag us at the Women's Fitness Academy, tag Jess, the love coach, tag myself. And then till next time, let's rebuild that self-love and self-acceptance.